Greetings hobbyists, this is Arsanzavul and welcome to the third in our series of videos on how to create a base for Adeptus Titanicus. At this point we've set up the basics of our scene with us making the tiling and this raised area in our first video and us setting up these stairs and this rail along the raised area in our second. If you've missed any of those, the links are in the description below, and if you want to follow along, please make sure you've completed those videos first. In this video, we're going to add some finer detailing to this scene, adding some battle damage and wear and tear to the general area. But first, we're going to want to modify our tiles a little bit further to make some room for something that's going to come later, and that is some buildings that I'm wanting to put in this front area for our titans to be walking over. This is going to be simply a matter of cutting these out, as we've done previously for the stairs, but we need to do that first before we start doing our detailing, otherwise we might end up detailing some areas that are just going to be cut out anyway. I'm going to start this by pressing Z to go to our top view, and I'm going to press Shift A to bring in a cube. I'm just going to scale that up so it's a decent size and bring that to approximately where I want my buildings to be. And they're going to be sort of in front of these stairs on either side. Now we're going to need to make this bigger, so let's scale that a little bit more still. Press G to move it, and I want to have these buildings coming in front of the stairs but not blocking them. That just wouldn't really make much sense, so let's start working out where these are going to be placed. I think that where it is at the moment is a relatively good gap, bearing in mind that we're going to want our Titan to be able to put its foot down somewhere when we're placing these. So let's start moving this around, and the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to move it on the Y-axis to get it further back, so G and Y, and that can be essentially anywhere between these two sets of tiles. That's not going to make too much of a difference, but we do want a nice neat line going this way, so I'm going to set on our snapping, come here and then press G and X and then snap it to that tile edge there, so we're going to have a nice neat line. Then I want to duplicate this, so let's turn off snapping and then Shift and D, and we just want to move this along our x-axis, as we know that's roughly correct. Let's have a look from above and make sure we're doing it a relatively similar distance from the stairs. So let's go G and X and then probably move it to about there. That's looking about right. So again, just going to put on our snapping and we're going to move that G and X so that it's up to those tiles. Let's get this cut out from our tiles. So we're going to select the tiles, let's hide that array or minimize it, and add modifier. We want a boolean and we want a difference boolean, which is already selected, and we're going to select this object. And you can see it's worked here, as we can see the tiles have gone when you can sort of see through by the green line. We need to do another one to get rid of that. So again, add modifier, boolean, and select that object. Now we can just hide these, but let's rename them. So we've got lower tile cutter 1, and then we'll rename that one as well. Lower tile cutter 2. Let's hide that. H and H, and let's check that everything's set up right. Yeah, that looks nice and neat. And there as well. So we've got some options here, but you could easily, once you've printed out the base, use a Games Workshop building or some other manufacturer's building to put on that base to make the ruins. So let's get looking at how to add some damage, and we're going to start with these stairs. We've actually got something we can already take advantage of here, which is the fact that we've got some extra geometry set up. If I go into edit mode, and we've already got the vertex mode selected. If not, just click it or press 1, and we can take advantage of these to add in some little bits of damage to our stairs. We're essentially just going to use the bevel tool to make some damage and chips out of the edge here. I mean, these are going to be fairly small stairs, you're not going to notice them hugely, but it is nice to know that they're there, and if someone looks closely, you might be able to see this extra damage. Now I'm going to press tab and go out of edit mode, and we have got a classic error or issue here, in that our scale has not been applied, and that's going to affect our bevel. So we're going to press Ctrl and A and apply the scale. It hasn't had an effect up till now in any negative way, but we do want to sort that out because it could do next. So let's go in. So we're going to start that by beveling this out. If I go into edge mode and select these two edges, press Ctrl and B, we're going to get an interesting looking bevel here. Now I'm not going to make them too large, something like that. If you've got more bevels, I would just bring it down to 1 so it looks like a sort of chip has been taken out of it, something like that. And you can see it's attempting to sort of bring that up there. I'm actually going to go into vertex mode, press 1 and slide this vertex along. Now there's a couple of ways of doing that. The first is just to press G and X and move it along that way. Perfectly acceptable. But there is a quicker way where if you double tap G, it constrains it to one of the edges that's coming off of it. And if I bring that up there and scroll out, you can see that looks like a pretty good chip that's been taken out of it. Similarly, I'm just going to move to another stair so they're not all in the right place. If I tab into this and I want to do something more central, I can actually press G twice. I've just realised that my screencast keys aren't on. Let me just fix that now. So if I press GG, I can just move along a little bit and then select the edge by pressing 2 and again bevel it, and it will make a nice interesting looking bit of damage coming out of that stair. So let's do that to a few more. Let's pick that one up here, select those edges, Control B, and then I'm going to press 1 to go into vertex mode and slide that along a bit. I'm just going to speed that up now and do a bit more damage to those edges. And I think that will do there. You'll notice these look a little bit big for chips, but that's quite intentional, being that this is Adeptus Titanicus and it's going to be printed out at a relatively small scale, and we want to be able to see these really clearly. Next, let's add some damage to our tiles, and we can do this in exactly the same way, but there is something important we're going to have to do first, and that is we are going to have to apply our modifiers to be able to access our geometry. At the moment, if I go into edit mode by pressing tab, you'll notice we can only actually edit the first one, because at the moment all these are multiple copies of just one tile. Now this is always a bit of a point where you really need to make a decision here, and you need to work out if everything you need to do is done before you make this decision. Now because of that, I always recommend taking this as an opportunity to save. So File, Save As, and again we're just going to press our plus to add one, so we've got AT base 4, save, and we've got that saved. So let's apply our modifiers. So we're going to click on our tiles and we're going to click apply all, and at that point this has applied all of our different booleans and arrays, and at this point we can't get into or change any of the information that's there. But it does mean that when I press tab, we're suddenly able to access all of the geometry of our individual tiles and be able to start doing things with them. So let's have a look adding some battle damage to these. So firstly, we can just go in and start beveling things again, for example entire edges. If I go into edge mode here, Control B, and I can start taking out edges, but this looks a little bit unnatural. You're probably not going to have this for a whole tile, so it is better, or at least in my opinion better, to start having a look at individual corners. Now this you can bevel as well, but instead of just pressing Control and B, you have to press Control Shift and B, and then it gives you access to beveling this corner. And you can make that small or large, and in a similar way, I'm going to select that vertex, GG, and slide it along to make it a bit more interesting, and then Control Shift B to do that one there, so it looks a little bit more like a tile would do when it's chipped. At this point, however many of those you decide to do is entirely up to you, and because we haven't combined this yet with our mesh underneath, we can do quite a lot with this. For example, we can Control Shift B and actually take out a good portion of one of these corners. Similarly, we can do the same over here. Let's move that along with GG, and we can make some quite interesting shapes. Now realistically, these aren't going to be that noticeable on the base from a distance, but they are going to look really good when someone picks it up and has a bit of a closer look. And if you decide to add some additional things onto your base, for example bits of sand or debris, they'll sort of get stuck in some of these points, which will sort of allow a bit of a build up and make things look quite nice. So again, I'm going to speed this up, go through, and add some of these chips in. Okay, there we go. Now you notice that I concentrated some of that damage generally towards the stairs, as that's probably where most people are going to be walking. And there's obviously going to be some more damage where you're going to have the Titan actually stepping down, but that's going to be a decision that's going to need to be later. And obviously I can add more to this with, let's say, a craft knife afterwards, and that's no problem to do. The other thing that I do want to point out is that this is quite a good thing to do on the edge of these stairs here, or the edge of the tiles. So I'm actually going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to select edge mode. I'm going to take out a few of these as well. And again, if I just change into vertex mode and press GG, I can make this a little bit more interesting. Okay, just to add a little bit more wear and tear in there. There we go. Now that's looking pretty nice, but we do want a little bit more variation in this. So I'm going to come back to this set of tiles, and we're going to use a different tool to try and make something a little bit more diverse. I'm going to go into isolated mode, so pressing / to get that up. And what I want to do is press Z, so I'm looking at this directly from above. And we're going to use a tool called the knife tool. Now to do this we have to be in edit mode, so tab, and it doesn't matter which mode we're in here for this. So I'm just going to press K, and this brings up this little knife symbol, and all I do is click, and I can add in as many as I want. Click, and when I'm done I'm going to hit enter, and that is going to put a finalized cut into this. Now it's important that we've actually been exactly on top view so that this knife tool hasn't cut into the edge of the tile here, and that's going to be really important when we start actually doing anything with this. So I'm going to do another knife tool. I'm just going to add in the sort of final bits of this crack and enter. Now what this has done is this has given me something that I can now edit to add a crack into this tile. And we're going to use the extrude manifold tool that we've used in our last video. Find that little circle symbol, and we're just going to drag it down. And as long as I've gone past halfway, remembering that we're in isolation mode, when I come out of this, I'll just do that now, you'll notice it's gone down to the bottom there, and we don't need any more. In fact, actually, if we go all the way to the bottom, that's actually going to create a lot of problems for us, so we don't want to do that. And we can go through, we can also use the knife tool if we wanted to add some more interesting corners to this instead of just being relatively straight. If I go back into K, hit enter, 3 for the face tool, and drag that down most of the way down, and then again when we come in we won't be able to see that, so just add a nice more jagged cut to this edge. So once again I'm going to spend a bit of time doing that. I'm just going to speed that up slightly, just adding in bits and pieces, and how damaged you're going to want to make this is essentially entirely up to you. The other thing I want to do is add some slight variation to these tiles. This isn't going to be that noticeable at a scale like Adeptus Titanicus, but if this was a larger piece, for example for 28mm models, this would be quite important as it would really make the scenes look more realistic. So all I'm going to do is just select a range of tiles, almost at random, and I'm just going to move those down, so G and Z, just by a tiny amount, and then I'm going to select a few more and do the same. Final thing is we can actually move some of the tiles to try and make them look a little bit more as if they've been damaged and been put out of place. Now, this isn't actually too bad to do if you know certain commands. I'm going to use vertex mode for this because I just find it a little bit easier to see. And all you do is you select one vertex and press the L key. And what that's going to do is that selects all of the linked vertices, but you'll notice that all of the ones around it haven't actually been selected. So now I can just do something like press R and X, and I can rotate this slightly just to get a little bit more variation on those tiles. This one will rotate it on the Y, so it's a little bit like that. Okay, and we can, if we really want to, just select one, press L to get everything. Sometimes it doesn't like it and you need to double click the vertex. It's a little bit odd, I haven't worked out why. Press L there. Okay, and this, because I haven't constrained it to an axis, is just doing it compared to the view, and it's going to make a few interesting effects. And if we want to, we could even do something a little bit more extreme, like select one, L to select it, that's R and X, sort of put it a bit at an angle. We could even move it with G. I'm going to constrain it by pressing Shift and X so it doesn't go along the X-axis, and sort of raise that on top of it. Now I'm going to intentionally put that inside the other tile, okay, and that's just going to mean that it's going to be more guaranteed to print correctly. But again, looks a little bit more interesting as that one's been put out of place. I'm going to do the same thing for one of them up here. So I'm going to select here, go into edit mode, select one vertex, L, R on the X, and then G, Shift and X so that it can't go along, it's only going up and backwards and forwards. Put that there and then come back out of it. And again, I think you'll agree that looks quite interesting. So now if we come and look at this, we've got a lot more variation on our tiles, and this just makes it a little bit more lived in and a bit more interesting. The final thing we're going to do is add something a little bit more extreme and have a bit of masonry essentially blown off by some sort of explosion or impact. Now there are again several ways of doing this, but I quite like just using booleans as a nice easy way to do it. So we're going to create a new object, and generally I find if I want something to look like a sort of explosion or destination, I generally use something like a sphere. And an icosphere, if I just bring this a little bit larger, is quite good for that. Now if I just press G and Z, we can have a look at what this looks like, and essentially it's a circle that's been broken down into triangles. Now at this point, this is not going to look great as an explosion. It's got lots of angular edges on it, and it's just not going to really look quite right. So we're going to have to deform this quite a lot to make it look like we want to. We need a little bit more geometry than this to be able to make this look right. So we're going to add a subdivision surface. And you'll see that's broken up everything into two, and I can do that a little bit more by clicking the levels here. And again, you'll notice that breaks up a little bit further. Now, subdivision surface is actually really meant to work on squares, so it's having a little bit of a interesting effect here. But either way, it's giving us a bit more geometry that we can work with to make our damaged area. I think realistically 3 is going to be okay. What I will say is that this can start to slow your computer down if you start trying to make this too detailed, so just be a bit careful with that. And we're actually going to apply that straight away, so we've got access to the geometry here. Now I'm just going to think about the shape that I want this, and I think what I want is this to be taking out a chunk of sort of this area here, just to be a little bit interesting. And again, being a circle is not going to look great, so let's scale this a little bit on the Z. Let's rotate it a little bit on the Y and rotate it a little bit on the X, so it's not going to be exactly where we want. And now we need to add some variation in this. So we're going to come in and modify this, and there are several ways of doing that, but my preferred way is one that gives a little bit more control, and essentially it makes it feel a little bit more random, and that is to use this option up here, which is called proportional editing. Now if I select this, it doesn't appear to have had much of an effect, but you'll notice the circle that's appeared around where the vertex originally was. And if I use my mouse wheel to change that, what you'll see is it actually affects everything around it. This is what proportional editing does. So what it allows me to do is just move things in and out to make things just look a little bit more rough and chaotic. We do have to be a bit careful with how we use this, because what we don't want is our geometry overlapping, but it does mean that I can make a nice rough surface that looks pretty random. Now there's a lot of trial and error with what works well, and you'll eventually find something that you like or something that's going to work. And I will add that what I fully intend to do is add some actual texture with things like sand afterwards. You can do that on Blender. There are things that allow you to add texture to surfaces, especially using the tools that would normally use to make hair and things like that. But they are quite taxing on computers. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure my laptop would enjoy it, especially if I used it a lot. So let's move this into position. So I want something about there, something coming in there. That looks about right. Maybe rotate that a little bit more. Something like that. Let's see how this plays out, and then I can make a decision if I like it or not. Now, actually, that bit there is looking a bit round, so let's move that there. Let's rotate it around that way. That I think will look a little bit better. I might actually need to come in here and do some modification there. So now that it's in place, I'm actually just going to isolate that, and again go in and just edit this using that proportional editing. And that looks better. Now, a few things to watch out for. First, that is going to cause some problems when printing if I just delete this. So I'm just going to G and Y that so that I'm getting rid of that potential problem there. And actually it might be useful to try and make sure that this column is left relatively whole. So I'm actually going to go in here, press G with that proportional editing, make that a decent size there so that I can affect this bit. So let's go here, G, and move that round to there. So now that is not going to cut off that bit there. Let's have a look in here, G, get the proportioning editing circle down. That's going to not cause a problem there. And let's have a look at this one on this side. And that's going to cut off the top of that, but that might actually look quite good if I just angle this around there. That could look quite nice. Now at this point, this is going to be much easier to do when all of these meshes are combined into one, as opposed to doing it individually and causing myself some hassle. So we're actually going to leave that final bit of deleting this and cutting it out until our next video, where we're going to be starting to combine these meshes together. So I hope you managed to follow along with that. If there's anything more you'd like to see while we're making this base, I'd love you to put it in the comment section so I can get some more ideas of what you guys would like to know how to do. And please do hit that subscribe and bell button so you know when the next video is posted up. I look forward to you joining me then.